You tweeted at me yesterday before the slate, don't be afraid to lose. And buddy, I was not.
Yeah, I just loved that quote that you had last week when we were talking through that, because it is like you have to be willing to lose, right? We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. Week 11 was fantastic. Didn't want to come on here, though, and victory lap by myself. So I'm actually going to force our next guest to come knock me down a few pegs, or at least talk through what just happened. This contest is a $1,000 entry, only 55 people in this one, so very small. And I think that if anyone's watching this right now and they're like, yeah, I don't have $1,000 to put into one lineup, that doesn't really matter. What you need to focus on here is the field size, and this is only a 55-person tournament. So my strategy in this type of stuff typically is just to really lean in to correlation and really try and leverage a little bit more in a small field, because we'll look at some of these ownership percentages and they can get extremely heavy towards the chalk. So I'll walk you through even just like a quick cliff notes of this, Davis. So basically what I decided to do was stack up this Green Bay and Minnesota game heavily. I like the game environment, all of that stuff. One of the things that I wanted to try and do, at least in this lineup, was just not be scared and fade mostly, at least, the KC and Dallas side of this, because I think that those game stacks were going to be extremely popular in something this small. I did lean into two of the chalk running backs. You can see, I guess, A.J. Dillon and Jeff Wilson Jr. were 70% plus in this, which is pretty crazy. Devontae Adams, 27%. But the stack as a whole, Rodgers, Devontae Adams, NVS, and then bringing it back with Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook. So full onslaught of this game, essentially. But there were some unique pieces in this that were a little bit lower owned. MVS, 3%. Justin Jefferson, 5.5%. And then Houston defense, 3%. They were literally the stone min, the cheapest defense that you could have played. And then that allowed me to get Travis Kelce in the afternoon. So not a lot of, I guess, PMR remaining for what was supposed to be a very interesting and high scoring game.
Slate.
It was supposed to be, right? Yeah. So I guess what's your initial thoughts kind of on this build? Obviously, Aaron Rodgers wasn't very popular, but a lot of the pieces in that game were. So that was kind of at least my starting point, is I wanted to figure out how to make a unique Rodgers stack to kind of at least make these chalk plays a little bit more palatable, I guess, in something like this.
Yeah, so the thing on FanDuel yesterday was that every team that didn't have Jeff Wilson Jr. was just at a huge disadvantage. I mean, he was 5,000. Like on FanDuel, it is just unbelievable how much rosters, like Donta Foreman was $6,200 to give you a comparison of like just how cheap he was. The best points per dollar play, at any position. He was the same price as like
first guy
Dan
in,
Arnold.
had to be.
Yeah, first guy in. So I will actually show you what I did on FanDuel with my buddy who plays in high stakes contests over there on FanDuel. I did essentially the same thing, overstacking the game, but with the super chalky game. So we did Dak double with Gallup and Schultz, and then bring back with Tyreek Hill. We played Jeff Wilson Jr. and A.J. Dillon. Our pivot play was Christian McCaffrey at 10,000. So kind of a similar thought. Your pivot plays were Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. And also, I think the sharpest thing you did in this lineup was that you realized that it does not matter. There's no correlation for A.J. Dillon. He was just the stone best play. Doesn't matter if he plays for the Packers. Just treat him as if he is an entity upon himself, because he could have gotten there. I mean, he had a huge snap share. He was targeted 6 times in the passing game. If they were on the 1-yard line, he was for sure getting the ball and could have caught a receiving touchdown, right? I mean, he already has a receiving touchdown this year. We've seen Aaron Jones do it in the same role. So that was the sharp, that and playing Justin Jefferson, when everyone else who would have played this lineup would have played CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill, just to get exposure to that game.
Yeah, there was a couple things that I at least considered when I was building this. I agree with you on A.J. Dillon, by the way. It was more just like it was a unique situation in Green Bay. We had Lazard out. We had a very condensed area of where these touchdowns could even come from, right? So A.J. Dillon, someone that is using the passing game, we talked about this, I believe, last week. Like if he backs into a receiving touchdown, it doesn't even that's basically Yahtzee, right? So we didn't get that, but it was a situation where he was active in the passing game. He still had 6 receptions in this one. So This full stack, adding in someone like MVS at a similar price point to Gallup as well, right? So 3% MVS, a team like Minnesota that definitely gives up big plays. I've seen that firsthand multiple times this year. And then Justin Jefferson at 5%. This was unique, right? Because I wanted to do, I was basically set on playing Dalvin Cook on this team. And then I'm staring at Justin Jefferson, and I liked both of them a lot. So it was more or less like, if I'm going to fully commit to this game being the highest scoring game on the slate, Justin Jefferson just made a ton of sense. And I hate not having much PMR because it really was, if this didn't work out, there wasn't much I could do. I could move off of Kelsey to, not much. So did end up going kind of all in on that. Another 2v2 I considered was moving up to the Seattle defense and moving down to Darren Waller. But I didn't end up going that direction in this one. Man, this was crazy though. I was at this game and it felt like everything, it was one of those slates where everything was just going right. Like the beginning of it was a little bit scary, and this one got off to kind of a slow start for sure. I guess outside of Justin Jefferson, who had like 100 yards in the first quarter. But outside of that, I was basically like, I just need a Devontae touchdown. He scores. And I was like, just anything from MVS is just going to be an absolute smash. And then he scores that touchdown. I'm running around the stadium like a crazy person. But this was a lot of fun to sweat live. Though what I really wanted to talk about, though, is kind of smaller contests like this in general, and how overstacking like this is a really uncomfortable lineup to build for probably a lot of people that are watching this. But I think in some of these that it might be a little bit more optimal because we don't need that high end ceiling performance. Like this is like kind of the very 1% outcome for this team, but this team cannot really take down something like the monster. I know we were joking about that on the tilt space, something that's like even 1,000 people, 2,000 people, like there's just not going to be enough ceiling here typically. So if we just look over at the Sunday Million, this team only finished in, let's see where it was. This team finished 200 or so, top 200 basically. So just turned $5 into $30. So obviously a really good team, but definitely didn't have the legs. There was no JT. That was the other thing I wanted to ask you about. So some of these smaller field contests, like if you don't have JT, you're still okay. Like if you, I guess, can weather the storm of like that 5% player not being in, I guess, the optimal kind of combination. But yeah, I guess a couple of things that I wanted to mention, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about, more stacking. And then, you can just survive things in small field a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's like you sacrifice a lot of the ceiling because look, this lineup like nutted out other than not having Jonathan Taylor, and you sacrifice, you're not winning $500,000 or anything crazy like that, but you are realizing your equity more often. And then the number one thing to note is just that you can get 80th percentile outcomes and be fine. You don't need you just simply do not need your 99th percentile outcomes. What the guy who won the Millie yesterday had 21% cumulative ownership. Like he literally just played the best plays. Like literally, like he was like, I know the best plays, I'm playing all the best plays, and got all those points, which is like that type of stuff happens. It actually happens all the time. I was about to say it never happens, but it actually happens all the time where the team that wins the Millie Maker just looks like a guy clicking buttons and has a bunch of guys at 1% owned or whatever. You're going to see that way less often in these. How many people are in this contest?
So like the 55 50? In this one. So yeah, it's very small, right? And like honestly, like this was like the funnest, I guess the most fun morning I've ever had, but the sweat was like, I was basically 30 points up the entire afternoon, right? On anyone in between this. So completely lapped the field on that. I always like looking at ownership too versus like the Sunday Million. Cause we had these running backs get up to like 75% in a contest like this. Sunday Million, AJ Dillon, 40%. Jeff Wilson Jr., 33%. And then I mentioned too that I've been playing these quintuple ups, Davis. So the $25 quintuple up, 500 people, you really see where the ownership goes in some of these too, 60+% for some of those guys. But what I'm really looking at is Justin Jefferson, 2%, MVS, 2%, Aaron Rodgers, 5%. So people are just playing cash lineups in this. So I still think it's kind of an interesting wrinkle to try and play GPP lineups in the quintuple up. So that's kind of where I got the rest of the ceiling. So cash pretty close to, I guess, a 10x or so when all was said and done in the contest that I entered with this one. So that was great, obviously. There was one more point that I had, and it's escaping me right now. But any other kind of final thoughts on this lineup?
No, I just think that it's a really interesting strategy, especially because the Vikings have been in like every game this season they've played like this, which I think is something that I maybe like kind of realized but did nothing with, because I just had the thing I wanted to talk to you about today before you generated the wealth was like all week I knew the ownership percentages for the Kansas City Dallas guys were gonna be insane.
Yep.
We're gonna be far higher than their optimal lineup percentages. But I just had so much FOMO of that game turning into Rams Chiefs Part 2. And I knew, because I love both of those teams, that I would never have forgiven myself if Mahomes goes, 505 and Dak has 404 with a rushing touchdown and Gallup goes off and Pringle goes off. Like, I never would have gotten over missing that. So like my lineups were actively worse this week because of like DFS FOMO.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had a lot of FOMO just going to this game, right? Because there was a lot of good plays in this game this week. So, I would say maybe there was a percentage of me that did feel like I had to be overexposed to this game just because it'd be a lot of fun. And this is about fun in some ways also. The last thing that I'll leave us with here is that one of the strategies that I think makes a lot of sense as well is really just trying to lean into this barbell approach, Davis. So we mentioned these running backs. They were very, very chalky. Obviously, Adams was very, very chalky. Tyreek, Kelsey, all of those guys, right? But these other pieces like Justin Jefferson, 5%, MVS 3%, and it was a part of my main stack with Rodgers at 5%, and I didn't really give up a ton of ceiling overall. So yeah, getting really lucky in the week where this stack hits, and also we have like the cheapest defense on the board hits at 3% as well. Like obviously multiple legs of this have to go right, but this is the kind of construction that I really want to focus on going forward. So regardless of if this team nutted out or not, I would have been pretty happy when the cards flipped over and saw these ownership percentages, I think.